So I want you to take a second and just imagine a prehistoric hunter-gatherer's dinner.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, right. Because if you're used to the standard narrative, your mind probably jumps straight to like a massive, totally unseasoned chunk of animal meat just roasting over an open flame.
Right. Pure survival mode.
Exactly. Just getting enough caloric energy to endure the elements and live another day.
It's a really pervasive image, and honestly, one that has dominated popular culture and even early anthropological assumptions for a very long time. You know, the archetypal hunter-gatherer relying entirely on the hunt.
But the mission of our deep dive today is to totally shatter that outdated stereotype. We're going to explore how prehistoric Europeans were doing far more than just fueling their bodies.
They really were.
They were actually creating complex, highly specific regional cuisines. And to map this all out, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources today.
We've got some great material for this one.
We do. There's this groundbreaking peer-reviewed study from PLOS One, led by Lara González Carretero and her colleagues, plus some incredibly detailed reporting from ScienceX and Ars Technica.
And I mean, the scoop of this research is just impressive. We're looking at 13 different archaeological sites.
Wow.
Yeah, spread all across northern and eastern Europe, covering this vast timeline between the 6th and 3rd millennium BC.
That is a huge chunk of time.
It is, and we are looking at all of this through the lens of 58 specific pieces of ancient pottery.
Okay, let's unpack this, because getting the scientific community to recognize these complex ancient diets required a massive leap in how we actually conduct archaeological analysis.
I really did.
Because for decades, the narrative was that these early populations were entirely meat and fish dependent. But that conclusion was, well, it was based on a flawed testing mechanism, wasn't it?
It was. It was based on a pretty significant methodological blind spot.
Right.
For a long time, the gold standard for understanding what went into an ancient pot was lipid residue analysis.
And lipids are just fats. Yeah.
Exactly. It involves running chemical tests on the fats that seeped into the porous clay of the vessels and just became trapped there over millennia.
So what's the inherent flaw in relying solely on those trapped fats?
Well, the bias is that lipid analysis is incredibly effective at identifying degraded animal fats,
Okay.
or the specific marine and freshwater lipids left behind by fish. It flags those compounds beautifully. The problem is that it is notoriously terrible at identifying plant matter.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, plant lipids do survive in the pottery. These are compounds like phytopinoids and phytosterols, but they degrade into incredibly generic markers.
So they basically just tell you some kind of plant was here, but nothing else.
Exactly. They cannot tell you which specific plant was processed. So, the old science naturally created a skewed data set. It painted a picture of a purely carnivorous diet simply because animal proteins were the only things our tests could clearly resolve.
That makes so much sense. So if the chemical fat markers were failing to capture the full picture of the prehistoric diet, how did this research team actually prove there were plants in these pots?
They shifted their focus. They went from looking at the invisible chemical ghosts trapped inside the clay to the highly visible, tangible leftovers.
The actual food.
Right. They decided to analyze the food crusts. These are the charred, carbonized bits of food firmly stuck to the bottom and sides of the pottery. And what's fascinating here is the multi-layered scientific approach they took to analyzing those crusts.
What did they do?
They combined traditional organic residue analysis with bulk isotope analysis, looking at the atomic ratios of carbon and nitrogen.
Okay.
But the major breakthrough came when they applied high-resolution microscopy to these charred remains.
Tell me about the microscopy, because this really seems to be the pivot point for the entire study.
It was. They utilized scanning electron microscopy, or SC.
Which is super powerful.
Incredibly powerful. By placing these crusty pieces of prehistoric leftovers under the electron microscope, they were able to magnify the material up to 1,000 times.
That's insane.
And under that level of scrutiny, the carbonized mass resolved into perfectly preserved cellular structures of plants.
What kind of plants?
They identified bran, seeds, leaves, and the parenchyma tissues of tubers, all intricately tangled up with fish bones and scales.
Wow.
The plants were there the entire time. We just needed the right lens to see them.
That is amazing. And reading through the Ars Technica and PLOS One accounts, the researchers didn't just stop at identifying the cells.
No, they took it a step further.
Yeah, they actually engaged in some intense experimental archaeology to verify how these specific crusts formed in the first place.
Which is a crucial step in modern archaeology. You have to prove that the natural cooking processes of the era would actually result in the specific cellular degradation seen under the microscope.
So they basically cooked a prehistoric meal.
They did. The team constructed modern replicas of Mesolithic pottery using historically accurate clay and temper. They built open fires, meticulously maintaining the cooking temperatures between 120 and 160 degrees Celsius.
Because that's the historical range for this type of ceramic cooking.
Exactly.
And they even went as far as foraging the specific ingredients they suspected were in the pots.
Right. They went all out. They gathered modern Guelder roseberries in England, froze them to preserve their structural integrity, and then boiled them in these replica pots alongside freshwater carp.
And what happened?
The resulting food crusts that formed on their modern replicas were then analyzed under the SEM and matched the 7,000-year-old crusts identically.
That is so cool. It just perfectly confirms it.
It confirmed the exact cooking methods and temperatures these early populations were utilizing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the team didn't just find a random, opportunistic jumble of whatever ingredients happened to be within arm's reach of the fire.
Right.
They found highly specific regional recipes. This implies a deliberate culinary tradition. So we should take a tour of the prehistoric European menu to see how distinct these regions really were, starting with the Don River Basin.
Okay, so the Don River Basin encompasses sites like Trikskaya and Staro Torbevo. The core protein source here was freshwater fish, primarily carp and other cyprinids.
But not just fish on its own.
Exactly. The electron microscope revealed they were actively processing and cooking the fish alongside wild grasses and legumes.
Yeah, the sources mentioned they found kernel pericarp cells and ularone layers, which suggests a level of processing way beyond just tossing whole grass stalks into the boiling water.
The presence of those specific cellular layers indicates they were actually separating the bran.
Wow.
They were processing wild grains to access the starchy endosperm. Furthermore, the researchers identified very small wild legume seeds with distinct patterning on their seed coats, which points to a species of wild clover.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Gathering and processing wild clover seeds and separating grain bran requires a massive investment of time and energy. It shows that creating a fish stew thickened with processed wild grains and legumes was a priority that warranted the labor.
It's a real recipe.
Yeah.
So let's look at how that compares to our next region, moving north to the Upper Volga and the Dnipropetrovsk area.
Right, which includes sites like Zamostje II and Serteya II.
And the flavor profiles here seem fundamentally different from the grain-heavy approach of the Don River.
Well, the environment dictated different resources, but the complexity of the preparation remains consistent. In the Volga region, the predominant mixture involved freshwater fish, fleshy fruits, and leafy greens.
And the main fruit was a bit problematic, wasn't it?
It was. The most prominent and challenging ingredient identified was Viburnum opulus, commonly known as the Guelder roseberry.
Yeah, and the Guelder roseberry is notoriously difficult to consume. Raw, they are incredibly bitter and mildly toxic.
Not something you want to just snack on.
No. And even when heated, the sources note they emit a remarkably pungent, really off-putting odor. Why invest the effort into an ingredient that seems actively hostile to being eaten?
The answer lies in the chemistry of long-term stewing.
Okay.
When you subject these bitter, mildly toxic berries to prolonged thermal processing, particularly in an emulsion of fats and collagens extracted from the boiling fish, the chemical structure of the berry breaks down.
Really?
Yeah. The toxicity is neutralized, and the bitterness transforms into a sweet jelly. They were utilizing the pottery to fundamentally alter the chemical profile of a toxic plant to create a sweet, calorie-dense sauce for their aquatic protein.
That demonstrates such an advanced understanding of their local ecology and how heat applied over time alters plant chemistry.
And this specific flavor profile, combining fish with berries, has incredibly deep cultural roots in northern climates. The researchers actually draw a compelling ethnographic parallel to the modern Nif people of the Russian Far East.
What do they eat?
They consume a traditional dish called mos, which consists of pulverized dried fish, fish skin, and berries. It highlights that the blending of aquatic protein and forest fruit is an enduring culinary tradition tailored to these environments.
That's a beautiful connection. The Volga sites also showed a heavy reliance on plants from the Amaranthaceae family, things like goosefoot and saltbush. But the microscopy revealed a detail about how they were harvesting these plants that really stood out.
The SEM imaging didn't just find the seeds of the goosefoot. It revealed entire inflorescences preserved in the crusts.
Meaning the whole plant structure.
Right. We are talking about the calyces, the stems, and the leaves. Finding the leafy structural components of the plant indicates they were gathering these greens continuously throughout the spring and summer to use as a fresh vegetable component in their stews.
Which means they knew exactly where to go.
Exactly. It suggests a sustained, planned engagement with the landscape, returning to the same plant patches over multiple seasons.
Let's transition to our final region, which represents a fascinating intersection of different ecosystems and cultures. We are looking at the Baltic coast, specifically sites like Dalki in Poland and Sulholms II in Denmark.
The Baltic sites offer a highly diverse assemblage of ingredients. You have evidence of marine fish, freshwater fish, roots, tubers, and surprisingly, traces of dairy products.
Wait, hold on. If we are discussing Mesolithic hunter-gatherer populations, finding dairy in their pots sounds like a massive contradiction. How do the researchers explain the presence of milk fats without breaking the established timeline of agriculture and animal domestication?
It's a profound intersection of timelines. The hunter-gatherer populations on the Baltic coast did not possess domesticated cattle.
Right.
The presence of dairy lipids in their pottery is almost universally interpreted as evidence of early, complex trade networks.
Oh, wow.
They were interacting with and trading resources with incoming early farming communities that had settled nearby. They were incorporating exotic, traded ingredients into their indigenous culinary practices.
So they were doing fusion cuisine thousands of years ago.
Essentially, yes.
And alongside those traded goods, they were processing complex indigenous plants. The Sulholm II site contained vascular and parenchyma tissues.
Those specific cellular structures belong to underground storage organs. The evidence points to the utilization of sea beet and sea club rush tubers.
Which, again, sounds like a lot of work.
Harvesting and processing underground tubers is highly labor-intensive. You have to locate the plant, dig through compacted coastal soil, clean the tubers, and then subject them to prolonged boiling to break down the complex carbohydrates and make them digestible.
It's not just grabbing an apple off a tree.
Not at all. Again, we see a massive caloric and labor investment to achieve a specific dietary outcome.
And the site at Dalki in Poland offers a really fascinating piece of evidence regarding the intentionality behind these recipes. The food crusts inside the Dalki pottery are packed with those difficult Guelder rose berries we discussed earlier.
Yes, they are.
But when researchers analyzed the surrounding soil at the site, they found something curious.
They analyzed the general archaeobotanical record. That's the seeds and plant matter that naturally fell onto the ground around the hearths.
And what did they find?
In the ambient soil, Guelder rose berries are virtually non-existent.
Which proves the berries weren't simply growing over the camp and dropping into the pots by accident?
It is definitive proof of targeted foraging. The inhabitants were leaving the camp, specifically locating the viburnum opulus shrubs, harvesting the berries, and bringing them back for the explicit singular purpose of processing them inside the ceramics. The pottery was reserved for this particular complex recipe.
So what does this all mean? We have fish and processed clover in the Don River Basin, toxic berries chemically transformed into sweet jellies in the Volga, and labor-intensive tubers mixed with traded dairy on the Baltic coast.
It's a vast culinary map.
It is. So when we synthesize all of this data, how does it reshape our foundational understanding of early human history?
We have to look at the chemical synthesis provided by the bulk isotope analysis. The researchers looked closely at the atomic carbon-to-nitrogen ratios and then nitrogen isotopes.
Right.
Nitrogen-15 isotopes accumulate as you move up the food chain, so high levels strongly indicate a diet heavily reliant on aquatic protein, basically fish eating other fish.
Makes sense.
However, the carbon-13 ratios in these crusts demonstrated a massive influx of terrestrial plant matter. The chemistry proves that while fish provided the baseline caloric fuel, the plants were deliberate, ubiquitous additions across every region. They were actively engineering textures and flavors.
They were basically operating as chefs, not just scavengers.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires us to completely reevaluate the origins of early technology.
How so?
The prevailing theory in archaeology for decades was that the invention of pottery in these northern hunter-gatherer societies was driven purely by utilitarian industrial needs. The assumption was that they were boiling down massive quantities of fish to extract oils or to manufacture adhesives and sealants for their tools and watercraft.
So the prehistoric equivalent of a chemical refinement facility.
Exactly, the paradigm. But this research demonstrates that while ceramics may have had industrial applications, these early pots were undeniably designed and utilized as genuine cooking vessels.
To make real meals.
They were invented, or at least heavily adopted, to expand the prehistoric palate and unlock the nutritional and flavor profiles of otherwise inaccessible plants.
And this wasn't just a few isolated individuals experimenting by the fire. The study points to a deep cultural coherence.
It does.
The researchers utilized a statistical correlation tool called a mantle test to analyze the relationship between the pots and the food.
The mantle test results are perhaps the most compelling part of the cultural analysis. They cross-referenced the specific technological traits of the pottery with the distinct recipes found inside them.
Right, because making a pot isn't just one step.
In pottery manufacturing, you make highly specific choices. What type of clay matrix you select, what temper you add, like crushed shell, bone, or quartz, to prevent the pot from shattering during firing, and the specific temperatures you use to bake the clay.
And the statistical analysis showed that those manufacturing choices correlated directly with the meals.
They found a statistically significant correlation. Pots that were technologically constructed using the exact same clay matrix and temper tended to contain the exact same specific plant and fish recipes.
That is incredible.
The knowledge of how to engineer a specific type of ceramic vessel and the knowledge of the complex recipe intended for that vessel were bound together. It was a complete package of cultural knowledge passed down intergenerationally.
The technique to build the tool and the culinary tradition were inseparable.
This raises an important question regarding how we view human development. What distinguishes food from cuisine?
That's a great distinction.
Food is biological fuel. It is the raw caloric intake required to maintain cellular function. Cuisine is cultural identity. Cuisine represents an investment of time, labor, and technology to create something that provides sensory pleasure and societal cohesion.
And they absolutely had that.
This study unequivocally proves that these ancient populations, thousands of years before the advent of widespread agriculture, had a vibrant, established culinary culture.
It fundamentally humanizes them.
Yeah.
They were not merely enduring the harsh realities of the Holocene forest. They were thriving.
Really?
They were gathering around a hearth, sharing deeply flavorful, culturally significant meals that required immense skill, ecological knowledge, and technological innovation to prepare. We have moved from a landscape of biased chemical tests that could only see animal fat to utilizing scanning electron microscopes to reveal these incredible, intentional, ancient stews.
It really changes everything.
It is a powerful reminder that to truly understand the complexity of ancient people, we have to meticulously examine the literal remnants of their daily lives, the dirty dishes, essentially.
The sophisticated engineering of their domestic sphere is where the true narrative of human ingenuity unfolds.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over based on everything we have covered today. We've seen that the complex processing of mildly toxic berries and the deliberate, prolonged boiling of tough tubers with aquatic proteins required the invention of ceramic pottery to be successful.
You simply cannot execute these recipes on a spit over an open flame.
Exactly. So, could it be that the very human desire for flavor, the pursuit of sensory pleasure and culinary complexity, rather than just bare biological survival or the need for storage, was actually one of the primary drivers for early technological innovation?
It definitely challenges the old adage that necessity is the only mother of invention.
Perhaps the invention of the pot wasn't entirely driven by the grim necessity of extracting fish oil. Maybe it was driven by the prehistoric pursuit of a remarkably good meal. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into prehistoric cuisine. Keep questioning the established narrative and keep exploring the hidden histories all around you.